anybody and their mother is like, well, I could be the king, like
Right.
I could just take
Well,
it.
that's
What if I
exactly.
form an army?
Look, that's exactly what happened when Robert died. Nobody wanted to cross Robert Baratheon while he was alive, and I get that because he's a dude who likes to fight. He's into war, and he's
Right?
good at it. He's good at it. But like once Robert's gone, you see like all the houses start swarming. I mean, granted, the Starks don't swarm. Maybe they should have. And when it was like the Targaryens, that just didn't really happen because there were so many Targaryens to rise up into that place.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. Amber here, joined with Laura, and we are back to finish off the third novella, The Mystery Knight by George R.R. Martin. Laura, there was a lot of good stuff happening in this book, but was there any like standout moments that just, gave you that George R.R. Martin dopamine rush?
What really gives it to me, in all honesty, is the complexity of everything. So,
Yeah.
like, we're in it, but as I'm reading through it, one of my favorite things about these books is, like, let's use a small example I've written down. On page 247, Dunk mentions that it's 1,000 leagues from here to the wall, and then immediately my brain just kept, like, flashing that. It's 1,000 leagues from here to the wall from Game of Thrones, like, over and over. It took me like 10 minutes to get back into reading after that. But it's those like connections across the spans of time, the really subtle foreshadowing and world building. That's what makes it so like distinctly George Martin to me.
Yeah. Was there any characters in this one that you really gravitated towards? Besides our stars, Dunk and Egg.
You know who I don't know as though I'd say I'd gravitated towards them, but I have an intense amount of questioning about them. Who is Maynard Plum?
It is Brendan Rivers, aka Bloodraven,
In disguise?
glamored.
That's what I was thinking.
Like a Melisandre glamour, because
That's
Maynard
what I was
Plum
thinking.
is wearing that big, I think it was moonstone brooch, I want to say.
That's what I was thinking, was that it was like a magical glamour, but we never really like touched on it.
Yeah, it's never confirmed or anything. It's just kind of like there's moments where Dunk sees him and he sees like one pale eye, and then he kind of looks again and he's like, oh no, that was just the brooch, fake out. But
yeah,
there's definitely something going on with Maynard Plum.
Yeah, especially because of the army showing up. Egg showed his boot and this and that, but I just don't think there was enough time to rally host from across Westeros like houses and get them to Whitewalls in the amount of time from when Egg showed his boot until they showed up. Somebody had to be on the ground from the start.
Right. You saying that brings me like right to one of my moments where I was like, oh, that is good. And I think this was more like me thinking about how the adaptation is coming up. We won't probably get to this novella shortly, but thinking about the adaptation, seeing Bloodraven roll up with his 300, what are they called? His raven's teeth?
Yeah.
His like personal entourage of 300 archers with weirwood bows. I was like, oh, what a flex. What a flex. I need to see that on TV.
The weirwood bows came across as the biggest flex of all.
Right? Oh, I want to see that so bad.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this turned into an adaptation, but I'm glad that I read the books first.
I think with this one, out of the three, it's definitely the most complex because I think it's so many characters that you need to keep track of. And there's so many people incognito, like the George George R.R. Martin special where he's got like, ooh, secret person over here, secret person over there. Each individual like mysterious person has their own entourage of mysterious persons. So it's like whiplash trying to kind of connect the dots and figure out who's doing what and who's aligned with who. I love it.
You know what, some of my favorite things about these novellas have actually been the historical context that they provide for like Westerosi politics. And you know
Yeah.
who is the ultimate historical gossip queen? Egg. Egg
Egg.
has always got the good gossip about everybody. Like, even in this story, he's like, oh, yeah, well, this person and this person and their parents. And I love it. He's always like ready on the mark. He's like, don't worry, I got you. I can give you the whole voir dire about someone.
He's like the Lady Whistledown
Yes.
of Westeros.
The Eggy Whistledown.
He's such a fun character. I keep looking at pictures of the young kid that's going to be playing him, and so like it's kind of seeped into like my visualization of while I'm reading the books. But man, I'm excited. I love how there's so many parallels in this book. Like Dunk is kind of seeing a little bit of himself in Glendon Ball,
Ooh.
little fireball. I really liked that camaraderie, even though I mean Glendon's kind of a dick. Like he's so sure of himself and he's really, super proud.
Girl,
But
he has parallel same energy to Draco Malfoy. It is all about my father's gonna hear about this.
But he's just like this young, this other young knight, and then like hearing Glennon Ball's backstory, it's like pretty tragic. But Glennon Ball has the confidence of Westerosi man ready to do some jousting, and he sweeps the floor with everyone, which is for one surprising to me because I kind of felt like he wasn't going to end up being this kind of like
Ultimate jouster.
yeah. And so as it went on, I'm like, go on, you. Like good for you. But there's so many of these like little more minor characters sprinkled in where like the more you get to know about them, they kind of have all these layers. Like Sir Kyle the cat, what a delightful character. Him being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna joust this lord who I knew when he was a child and I carved him his first sword, so I'm going to joust this guy and then I'm going to take the fall so I can ingratiate myself with him. And then he'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember you. Come into my service. And, like, of course, it doesn't work out that way, but, like,
Nope.
Dunk is constantly running into these characters. He's having that divide of, like, what is knightly and what is, like, right, what is wrong. And he's just seeing, like, the world isn't as black and white as he sees it, and this line between honor and livelihood and everything like that, it's just
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
Dunk has a really intense center of justice.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and as we get through these novellas, you kind of see how his worldview adapts to living in the world. When he starts out, it's all ideology and heroism, and then he learns that maybe things aren't that simple, and then he learns, in our second story, that people who may be your enemies, maybe you guys just need to talk things out and find common ground, and like not everything has to be blood and war all the time. And now here we are again where he's faced with another like major moment of things going haywire and him kind of like somehow always ending up in the center of it.
I love how he always just kind of wanders into something. Like so many critical major moments.
Okay, so when the snail, Uther Underleaf, offers
Yeah.
him the deal is like, you're just going to travel around with me. I pay you big money and you just take the fall. And you can tell like in Dunk's response, he cannot fathom that type of deception.
No.
He's very honest, he's direct, he's authentic, and like it does seem like always kind of shocking for him whenever he comes across these like characters who are very Machiavellian in nature. The whole tournament was rigged. It
Yeah,
was
like you
being
have
rigged
this
by so many people, and then like the master of
on so
games.
many different layers too. Like,
I wish they had done a short scene where the master of games was taking like open bids for who was going to get their way. Because what else do you do as a bookie at that point? You're like, you know what? It's going to the highest bidder.
well, yeah, like we've got Uther doing his own scheme on one side. We've got John the Fiddler's men, Cockshaw and Peake. They're scheming in their own way. They're trying to fix the
They're
joust
literally
for
hedging,
John the Fiddler.
literally
Yeah.
hedging their bets.
Yes. Yes. And then we've got Butterwell, who's like caught in the middle, and he doesn't know who to hedge his bets on, whether it be the Targaryens or the Blackfyres. Like, it's just everywhere you look, there is some type of manipulation happening where it's just so fulfilling. It's just so
It
fulfilling.
really is. And in all honesty, watching Dunk kind of grapple with his place in society is strangely fulfilling also.
Yeah. Yeah. The more he's around Egg, the more he's becoming a little bit more worldly, I
That's
guess.
exactly what I was thinking.
You've got Dunk always being like, quit being insolent or I'm going to slap you around. Egg, he's kind of like the boy who cried wolf, where he has a big mouth. And so he's saying so many things that I think that like sometimes he's not quite sure when to speak now and when to keep something in. And so it's creating problems because if he knew when to hold his tongue and when he knew to display like the right data and the right information, they would really be an unstoppable team.
Yeah.
But then Dunk needs to work on his drinking as well so he can be a more receptive listener. He
Agreed.
was smashed.
Dunk, I think, really needs to kind of separate away from the identity that Sir Arlan gave him. And he needs to find a variation of that identity that is more authentic to him. So instead of just being like, I follow these rules because these are the rules I'm supposed to follow, we're seeing Dunk get to a point where it's a little bit more of like, I have these set of like guidelines that I would want to follow, like honor, integrity, honesty, all of the values of being a knight, while he gets a little better at dealing with the less romantic ideals of knighthood, like the reality of knighthood.
Yeah, Dunk does tend to kind of fall into this line of thinking where it's just a little too whimsical.
Yeah. When we talk about like even Dunk's ideologies, Egg's ideologies, we see a lot of this in this universe, like in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe. We see the ideologies, the best of what something can be, and then we also see the harsh underbelly.
Yeah, I also enjoyed how this novella, like the first, is introducing more prophecy into the story. And it's
Yeah.
another one of those stern reminders that,
Prophecy matters in this universe.
yeah, in A Song of Ice and Fire, you're going to see a lot of prophecy, but it would be incredibly foolish to ever take prophecy at like a first glance and presume that you understand what the vision, what the prophecy is.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy how Martin handles prophecy and makes it so that you can't ever take it literally.
Right. There's always another way to kind of, I guess you could never go with your first thought of like, oh, I understand it. I know what this means, and then take that for granted because it never works out that way.
So like we do know that the fiddler Damon Blackfyre's his vision does actually come true, just not in the literal sense.
Yeah, he interpreted
Yeah.
interpreted
Yeah,
it
he
falsely.
went way too literal in his interpretation. And he's also not in the know, much like most of the Targaryen dreamers we've encountered, that they're having prophecies about things that are going to happen hundreds of years from now. That all of these prophecies like really kind of round out themselves and like head right towards the birth of the three dragons much later down the road.
Yeah, it also makes me look at A Song of Ice and Fire with more of a magnifying glass because when you think about, all of the prophecies in A Song of Ice and Fire, like Azor Ahai, stuff like that, it makes me really want to kind of just not go with the most surface level ideas, I guess.
No, I get what
I
you're
mean,
saying.
at this point, the story's been out there so long that, there's a million theories,
Right.
but I have a feeling that no matter how the story ends, if it ever ends, that it's not going to be as simple as like, oh, it's, Azor Ahai Jon Snow, you know.
Right.
I'm hopeful that this means that like if we do ever get any type of conclusion to Winds of Winter at least, like we've got some more that old George has got some more tricks up his sleeve, because like something like this story, it's short, it's really tight, but in the sense of it being like a short, tight story, you've still got so many layers of so much stuff going on where if he can do that and like what was this, like 200 pages maybe? Probably not even
Oh,
that
I don't even
much.
think it was like, I think the whole book, so all three novellas together are like 350 pages. And
Okay.
that's, yeah,
Yeah.
my book has all three of them together. I do know that like the Mystery Knight is the longest of them. And like you were saying, it has a lot more complexity to it, which I really enjoy because it really does like, we keep, looking back on our other two stories in these like, passive ways that it's brought up because like we hear about Sir Bennis the Brown a couple times in this story, just in reference. And so one thing that I really do enjoy is like how we're checking in on the past and also checking in the future all like simultaneously.
Yeah. I also think that this story, out of all of them, has so many just really colorful characters. All of them have really interesting, colorful characters, but I feel like this one especially. I mean, John the Fiddler is Damon Blackfyre. Like, we have a gay knight who's not a
Is
knight,
it
but a lord, but he's always making these innuendos like, oh, Dunk, like, I'd love to joust with you. You're a big man.
wasn't that the fiddler
Like,
though?
what did I
I
say?
well, I wasn't sure. I was just making sure because like isn't the fiddler the one who was like up on the ramparts or the battlements or whatever and they were having that
Yeah, who
like
did I
I don't
say?
remember who you said, but I was like
Okay. Yeah. I meant John the Fiddler, if that's not what I said.
yeah, and like you can see when you're reading, Dunk is not picking up what's being put down. Not
No,
at all. In
no.
fact, he seems like really confused.
Well, yeah, I mean, John the Fiddler is constantly going out of his way to kind of he really wants Dunk on his Kingsguard. He keeps talking about how he's a big strong man. At one point he's kind of like massaging his
Massaging the
shoulder.
shoulder, yeah. When we got to the massaging the shoulder part, I was like, Dunk, how did you miss that?
Dunk the Lunk. And I mean, I don't know, like I just George's humor, it's a trip, man. Like I hope when they adapt this story, look, like they gotta I hope George is more connected with this series because I feel like there are some real gems in here in a way that I just don't connect with Fire and Blood. I'm about to start my own racket, like hedging my own bets. I want this adaptation to be like the one. Like
Ooh.
it needs to be
Yeah, I really
the pride and joy of Max.
yeah, so like definitely like reading material wise, I would go A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms over Fire and Blood any day. I find it more enjoyable. It has more depth and complexity to the story. It ties into the culture of Westeros. It has like all these themes of identity and allegiance that arise throughout every portion, like each one of the novellas.
Yeah. Do you know what struck me like at the very end that I love is we start out this novella where Dunk and Egg are kind of like hiding in the brushes as we see John the Fiddler and Cockshaw and Gorman Peake kind of passing by.
Ooh, yeah, the foreshadowing here.
Yeah, and then later he's like talking to Egg about Peake. and he's getting this story about, their sigil, how do you lose 3 castles, blah, blah, blah. And he realizes that Gormon Peake was the one who killed Ser Arlan of Pennytree's
son,
earlier squire, who
Roger.
was I think his nephew.
Oh,
Yeah,
Roger.
And so Dunk has kind of got this in the back of his head, like, oh, like I really want to joust. I want to take this guy out. Like how great would that be for me to kind of like get that over the guy who caused pain to like my beloved dear Ser Arlan of Pennytree, right?
Right.
And in the end, we have outside of Bloodraven's tent after, everything is done. They, capture and collect John the Fiddler, aka Blackfyre. Then we see Gormon Peake's head on a pike outside of Bloodraven's tent, and Dunk closes the eyes on like the head, on the face of the head, and he's like, well, he's thinking to himself, had it not have been for this guy killing Roger, Ser Arlan of Pennytree would have never needed a new squire, and I would have never been in the position that I'm at now. And it all kind of came full circle.
Yeah.
He has every reason to be hateful, but Dunk is always kind of like looking at the silver lining, which on one hand, it's incredibly stupid sometimes, but on the other hand, it's incredibly endearing.
I think that in some ways it keeps him on the path that he's on.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't divert and then take jobs to, throw tournaments or do this or those other, like any other thing that he's been presented with that he feels some sort of like ethical concern for.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like how it was very much like the wheel wills kind of thing that you hear in the Wheel of Time, like that, the wheel wills. And it's kind of like just, he starts to put together how these events, though they were tragic, are actually what led to him having the opportunity that he has. And I think that you can see when you're reading that realization had a pretty large impact on him.
I also really enjoy too how many little stories are within this story, like talking about Sir Gormon Peake, this Lord of Starpike, like how many moments within the story we get Egg pulling someone aside to give a history lesson, like you said earlier on, where I don't know, like it's just so neatly kind of like tucked in there, and then it's like, and then we're on to the next plot line. Like we get that little segment, but within this story, a lot of these segments are done in a way to just kind of like kick you between the eyes with like lots of foreshadowing.
Right.
Where we have this, was it a priest or a preacher that's hung, right? Isn't he in a cage maybe? I don't remember. But they pass this guy who they killed because he was preaching against Brendan Rivers, against Bloodraven. And as we get closer and closer to this tournament, we learn more and more, like Gormon Peake, how did he get his 3 castles on his sigil? How did he end up with only 1 castle? Well, he got 2 of his other castles taken away because he was a Blackfyre supporter. And like as we get closer and closer to this marriage and this tournament, Egg's like, got a lot of Blackfyre supporters around these parts. Does anyone else not think this is weird? Like, poor kid.
The dynamic between Dunk and Egg is one of my favorite things about these stories, like hands down. First, like their relationship is so pivotal to the story and their journeys. And they have like the most wholesome relationship, and you can really see like the loyalty that Egg has to Dunk. And in all honesty, vice versa, because even like little things like where Dunk's at the marriage feast and he's sitting there while all these festivities are going on, and what he's thinking about is, how can I steal good food for Egg in case they didn't give him good food out with the squires?
Yes.
Like, it's little things like that. Egg going off the rails thinking that Dunk had died and preparing to bring down the might of the entire Targaryen house because he thought Dunk was dead. And it's like, it's funny at the same time, but it's so like, it enriches the story so much.
Yeah, that last kind of showdown between is it is it Gorman Pike? I think it is Gorman Pike and no, it was
This Uther under.
Black Tom
Oh,
Hiddle.
yeah.
Black Tom Hiddle and Dunk in the chapel or whatever it is.
In the
And
sept near the well with the knife.
yeah, at the sept. And right before things going down, Dunk shoves Egg like out of the way. And he's like giving him this speech like this is what you need to do. Like this is where you need to go. It's almost like where he would do anything for this kid.
Yeah.
And in a lot of stories, I would be kind of turned off by, I think, someone with this personality that has to be so much of like a paladin all the time,
Mm.
almost too black and white. But there's something about Dunk where he doesn't have that holier than thou attitude. Like he comes from nothing, that he's just so much more likable.
Yeah.
He's never on a high horse about anything.
No, he really
Actually, in
isn't.
fact, he's typically always talking down on himself. His kind of like inner monologue to himself is always, "You're an idiot," which how can you not love the guy? Like you feel
Yeah.
bad for him on one hand, but he's noble, he's strong, he's down to cause a ruckus if anything happens to Egg, and love it.
And like as we get through this third novella, it really starts to bring together why Egg's future as king is hailed as like such a compassionate and humanistic time of rule. I mean, his father was right. Like by sending, I realized that they couldn't have predicted that Egg, the fourth son of a fourth son, would become king. But when he sent him out with a hedge-knight to live in the world, his father wasn't wrong for doing that because his father wanted him to see what the rest of the world lived like. What it
Hmm.
was like outside of living within the royal family and the like echo chamber that can kind of create.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think too we've got a like a fair sprinkling of what it's like in Egg's family, and we get to meet some of his brothers, and we know a little bit about his family in that aspect, but he's the best one. Like
I'll be honest,
he's
like this era of the Targaryens seems to have some of the best Targaryens in it.
that, and it also has, I mean, if we even just like, if we put the Targaryens aside, I'm so wrapped up in the Blackfyre stuff. And I think it's really interesting because, on one hand, you have a king that was like, oh, like he cared too much. Like, if we go to Fire and Blood, if we go to like Vizzy T,
Ooh,
he cared too
busy
much where
tea.
he's like, okay, I'm going to hand off this position to my heir, my daughter, right? Huge problems, causes massive problems. We can debate whether or not like it's just, it's fair, it was right. Like there's so many aspects to it, but then you have some of the Targaryens who was like, I'm just going to go ahead and like all of my bastards, not a problem anymore. Like you're all legitimized. Good day with you. Well, it just causes so many massive problems when somebody is feeling rather than thinking.
Right. And think about like the parallel between finding the dragon riders and Fire and Blood with this.
Yes.
I really enjoy how there's parallels throughout each of the stories, even though like the stories as a whole span hundreds of years in time in that universe. But there's all of
Hmm.
these like definite tied in connections that start to show themselves as you take in more and more of the world. And I just love it.
You saying that, man, maybe that's why I like the dragon seed so much. Like maybe it's just kind of, I never really thought about why I found that so entertaining, but maybe that's because it just feels like a crossover of like other aspects within this story that I like.
Yeah, there were a few times in this story and the other two novellas where I was like, okay, I can see the crossover and how these are either foreshadowing or kind of giving us a little bit more detail on something that had maybe happened in the past. And like, it really starts to bring things together, and you can see how all these like millions of moving parts start to turn as one to later become a Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish there were 10 more of these. Like, it's
Me too.
pretty sad.
Me too.
Getting to the end.
You know, in 2015, George wrote that there would be more of these stories to come, and I would really appreciate if he could open the vault on that and let some of them out.
You know, it might be a good way to help cure whatever writer's block he's having, just to focus on a different project.
Yeah, like
I mean, I know he's listening, so George.
like I think for me, like, do I want a Song of Ice and Fire to be concluded? Yeah, I would love for all 7 books that were originally slated to happen. But if they can't happen, I can accept that. But I would really love more of these novellas as a consolation prize.
Yeah.
I mean, solely just for the amount of time I have invested in George R.R. Martin.
Same.
You know, I would like to touch back on, like, the complexity of plots that we always have going on. The political stakes and the complexity of Westeros that are so tied to these like large scale political coups and plots. Like, if you think about it, organizing all of these Blackfyre supporters into one tournament actually is quite a bit of work, especially because of all the background work you have to do. And when you look at it, like, you can see the parallels between like the Blackfyres and the Targaryens that then later becomes the Lannisters and everybody, basically, because you can just keep switching houses out. We see how it shifts from family to family, but at some level kind of always stays the same because everybody's always making plots.
Yeah, that's really interesting because regardless of the power vacuum, it might actually be worse if there's not a Targaryen on the throne, because if it's a Targaryen, then it's always just going to be Targaryen versus Blackfyre. But if you have like a Robert's situation where Robert Baratheon dies, then you've got like anybody and their mother is like, well, you know, I could be the king, you know, like
right.
I could just take it.
Well, that's exactly.
What if I form an army?
Look, that's exactly what happened when Robert died. Nobody wanted to cross Robert Baratheon while he was alive, and I get that because he's, you know, he's a dude who likes to fight. He's into war, and he's good at it. You know, he's good at it. But like, once Robert's gone, you see like all the houses start swarming. I mean, granted, the Starks don't swarm. Maybe they should have. And when it was like the Targaryens, that just didn't really happen because there were so many Targaryens to rise up into that place.
Yeah, it makes an interesting conversation to talk about different types of systems, right? Like, is monarchy better? I don't know. I mean, like, in reality, no.
No, I think
like,
the only way monarchy works is if you handle it like Maekor Targaryen does, where you send your kids out to live in the world without you, away from the comforts of their royal home, to experience what their constituents experience.
Right, but that's only going to work if you don't have a bratty, spoiled Nepo baby who doesn't, you know, want the comforts of home. Like, Egg is just this unique individual. He's like, he wants to get out there and he wants to be a squire and he wants to be a knight, but
yeah, and he's got a sibling who wanted to be a maester. So
yeah,
and it could be just like that specific set of siblings are, you know, they're born and in their conscious mind, they are so far away from the throne that being royal is really just the perk of having money to them. Like, nobody's training any of them for the throne.
Man, you know what we would we would make a wonderful reread podcast of A Game of Thrones if we ever found the time to do it.
I mean, I'm 100% down.
I think the only reason I haven't been like, oh, I'm totally in 100%, let's do it. I still get kind of like bummed out knowing that the main series isn't finished.
Yeah,
so I'm like, do I want to go back there and then like end where it ends and feel sad again?
You know, though I will say this, I have been wanting to do a reread. That way I can go through some of these like wilder, like foreshadowing theories that exist and like see if I can make sense of them.
You know what we could do? You know what we could do that would be more more unexpected? We could read some of George R. R. Martin's other books that
Ooh,
aren't as good.
I would like that too. I have the Ice Dragon. Do you have that one?
I don't I don't. I'll look into it. I'll get it. We can yeah, let's do the Ice
It's
Dragon.
just a little guy.
Just a little guy.
It's 120 pages and it's like only
Oh, that is little.
yeah, and it's like an actual little book, so it's 120 little pages with illustrations. So it's yeah, it's just another little tiny novella.
Or, we don't even have to do George R. R. Martin. We could just read other books.
That's true. We could.
A lot of options here. We're definitely going to cover the show when it comes out. Definitely.
Oh, 100%.
I'm actually more upset about this than I care to say that this is the last novella.
So like I had saved those last 5 pages of the novella for right before we did this, and while I was reading them, I could feel myself being like, man, I really wish this wasn't ending.
Yeah, because they're supposed to end up in Winterfell next story.
Yeah,
And
take me there. I want to see
Right?
Dunk and Egg at the wall because I feel like they are gonna have some
Right.
fun,
Right.
little like they're. I think the wall will present each of them with new like real world perspectives and challenges that they have not encountered before.
I need to get a hold of old Preston Jacobs and tell him, hey, this whole Winds of Winter
Let that go. We're gonna need you
project,
to write
let
for
it
this.
go. And focus on the she-wolves of Winterfell. So,
Ooh, that would be fun.
man, I don't know. It's just, George, you're breaking my heart. You're breaking my heart.
Yeah,
I don't know.
but for like the people listening, if you haven't read these novellas before, I 100% recommend them. They
Right?
are just, they're like short and fun and whimsical, but they still have a ton of depth and complexity to them. They're great.
Yeah, and also, people who are listening, maybe you have some good
Suggestions.
suggestions on what we could read together to keep this little podcast thing going because I love doing this. It is way more entertaining to have a discussion rather than just review a book for me personally. There's a lot of books out there. I don't know how many books are out there that I'm going to love as much as I love these little novellas, but I'm here for suggestions. But yeah, so suggestions, we'll take them. Please leave some comments. Please like, share, subscribe, do all of those things. I would love some feedback on this little episode with me and Laura. And thanks so much for listening. We will be back next time.